Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to another edition and another conference of JSET. So first, I'm going to start with a brief introduction about what is JSET, and then I'm going to we can proceed with the introduction with Fernando, and then the talk. So JSET, or the seminar that we are sharing today, it address of, or it's named after just socio-ecological transitions in Latin America. And it started 1 year ago during the fall of 2023 as an initiative co-directed by Joe and Andrea with the support of scholarship from the Dean of the WCNR College. And it was a grant for transdisciplinary approaches to environmental weed problems. One of the primary goals of JSET is basically build transdisciplinary community of practice between different actors that can be faculty members, practitioners, and students that are working on socio-ecological challenges in Latin America. And during the last semester and this semester also, we are exploring different experiences and approaches that address socio-environmental challenges across CSU, other universities, and different experiences and contexts in Latin America. And today, we are happy to welcome Fernando Galeana Rodriguez, that is an assistant professor from the Faculty of Sociology and the Institute for Integrative Conservation at College of William and Mary in Virginia. And Fernando has been working with the examination of territorial struggles and socio-ecological environmental conflicts in the Global South, with a special focus on efforts to defend community land rights. And his latest projects also include applied research with partners and students within the conservation research program at William and Mary College, where he is involved in projects in Mexico and Kenya that focus on ecosystem services. And today he's going to share his experiences in the project Resisting the Green Desert in Mexico, a citizen science collaboration to support community-based forest restoration. So Fernando, I give you the word and the speech now, so you can start your presentation and sharing all your knowledge with us. Thank you.
Excellent. Muchas gracias, Paula. It's such a pleasure to be here. Buenas tardes a todos. Good afternoon. So the presentation slides are in English, so I think I'm going to proceed in English, but probably at some point I'm going to switch into Spanish as well. And for the Q&A, like we can do it in either language. So as Paula was mentioning, I'm going to be talking today about the Green Desert in Mexico, which is a new project that I started since I arrived in William and Mary in 2021. So for me, has been a very interesting project. I grew up in Mexico, but most of my professional activities have been in Central America since I started a PhD project. So this really became a very unique opportunity for me to get in touch back to some of the conservation issues, and precisely in Mexico City, which you may not normally think of Mexico City as being a biodiversity hotspot or as being as one place that we should talk about conservation, but yet in fact it's a very important place for conservation. So some of the interesting facts that we may find, right, is that even though it's less than 1% of the country's total soil forest area, it has about 12% of the national biodiversity and also 2% of the global biodiversity, right? So here we have a city of 9 million people in a metropolitan area of almost 23 million people, and yet because of the geographical location in which it is located in this transition zone between the Nearctic and the Neotropical regions, it's really one of the most diverse places in Mexico. Also, like this has partly to do with the watershed dynamics of the Mexico Basin, that until recently, like, it used to hold a very vibrant wetland and lake network that unfortunately now is in the process of draining. So as I was mentioning, this is a very emblematic place for conservation, and we can actually find most of the vegetation types in the country are found here in the Mexico City area, right? And this has mostly to do, again, because of the altitudinal gradient that goes from the 2,300 to 4,000 meters above sea sea level, and this forms a very important corridor for species. So in terms of the conservation areas of Mexico City, so one of the reasons why we also talk about Mexico City as being a conservation area is because actually only 41% of the jurisdiction of Mexico City is considered to be urban, and the rest, 59%, it is part of a conservation land, which provides very important ecosystem services in terms of water supply, of pollution reduction, microclimate regulation, and for these reasons, like these places that are particularly south of Mexico City under protection. They first started being protected in the late 1970s with the creation of the first master plan for urban development that assigned the southern parts of Mexico City and the northern part of Sierra de Guadalupe as a conservation territory. Then in 1996, after the approval of the new urban law in Mexico City, then this zone was established as the conservation land use o suelo de uso de conservación, as is known in Spanish, with its policies and its different instruments. But as you can imagine, this is a region that faces significant threats. So some of those threats like have to do with the degradation of the ecosystems and the loss of these ecosystems. So it was estimated that between 1970 and 2005, about 10% of the forest cover in the conservation land was lost. And the estimates, unfortunately, is that there will be about 219 hectares that will be lost annually for the projections that were made from 2010 to 2030. So some of the ecosystem that has been the most altered has been, like, first and foremost the oak forest and the pine oak forest, which are also the largest in terms of extension. The scrublands and the wetlands in particular, these are considered the most deteriorated. And we also used to have in Mexico City cloud forest, the high altitude cloud forest called the mountain cloud forest, which in the latest survey in 2016, it was estimated even to be extinct, right? So there's lots of urgency. So as part of this habitat loss, we also experience a species loss, right? So there is 124 species that are from this region that are included in the red list of. In particularly, we have two endemic species that are very important for conservation in Mexico, which is the Sierra Madre sparrow that is currently only found in the subalpine grasslands south of Mexico City, and also in the state of Durango. So very vulnerable. And we also have the volcano rabbit, which is the smallest rabbit in the world, and that is also endemic to this region. And most of the the main reason why these species are endangered has to do with the destruction of their habitat due to agriculture, urbanization, and deforestation. And later in the presentation, I'm going to expand more on those particular aspects that have to do with agriculture and even with some conservation policies as well that contribute to this habitat destruction. In terms of ecosystem services, so of course, this is an area that is very important. Particularly, I want to highlight water. So also another way that this forest, the conservation zone in Mexico City, along with the continuation of the forest corridor in the state of Mexico and the state of Morelos, they are collectively known as the water forest or the bosque de agua. This was a phrase that was coined by researchers in Mexico and by Greenpeace in the 2000s as a way of raising awareness. It is estimated that over 70% of the city's water supply is actually filtrated in this region in Mexico. So as you can imagine, it's very, very important. Unfortunately, there is a very incredible problematic with water supply in Mexico. Just as this headline that was published recently in in the New York Times in this May was basically talking about this day zero that was potentially going to come in June 2024 when the water supplies in Mexico City's main reservoir was going to be below a certain level for it to be able to supply the required water for the city, right? This has to do with the extreme drought conditions that the country has been facing as a result of climate change, also from the over extraction of groundwater, and this groundwater is the one that is infiltrated from the water forest, and that is then and that is pumped from different wells in the Mexico basin, and also from outdated infrastructure, right? So this framing again of the bosque de agua, or the water forest, has been one of the main avenues in which environmental activists and community activists have been trying to raise awareness for people in Mexico City to pay attention to the importance of this forest. In terms of the threats, we have first and foremost land use change. So as you can imagine, this conservation area being right next to this sprawling city, right, of 23 million people in the metropolitan area. So there is huge pressure from irregular settlements that keep increasing. Also, like this region is very active in agricultural and agroecological practices. In the Q&A, I can extend on the agroecological practices. It's one of the places for the birth of maize as well. So there's a long-standing tradition of agroecology, but also, as you can imagine, there's been pressures for more industrialized forms of agriculture that are creating a havoc of different environmental disasters. Also, there are fires that are altering the landscape. These fires had become even more prominent with the drier conditions as a result of climate change as well. And as we are going to be discussing, even some of the conservation policies for tree planting have actually also exacerbated this problem of fires. And then we also have the overexploitation of species and resources. So there is still illegal logging for timber that happens in this region, as well as overexploitation of aquifers, of people that have private wells that they distribute water without the required permits. And of course, climate change is exacerbating these different problems with temperatures with temperatures estimated that will be considerably warmer in the upcoming years. So now, in terms of conservation policies, right? So the first conservation policy that was established for the management of this area came in 1947 when a ban was declared on all of the forests within Mexico City and the state of Mexico, which basically prohibited any form of extraction or use of the forest. Ironically, in the same year that the communities were banned from the use of forest, the government also issued a concession to a paper mill, Loreto y Peñapobre, for the extraction of wood for the production of paper, right? So here we are all familiar with those ironies of supposedly conservation policies and green grabs as well. So this obviously created a form of enclosure when the rural communities, when they became a part of the supply chain for providing the raw materials to the company, but they themselves face a variety of restrictions where they could not do extraction for their own, like either for their own consumption or for their small businesses as well. In the 1970s in particular, there was a strong mobilization against this company, which ended its operations in 1985. There is a debate in the literature if the company ended because of the pressure that was mounted from this protest and from other environmental groups, or if it was just not economically viable for them to continue operating. So there is more research to be done there in that area. Now, in terms of the most recent 3 decades, so as you can imagine, with neoliberal conservation, right, like these conservation incentive programs have been at the forefront. First, we have those that are managed at the federal level. So for background, Mexico, it's a federal system. So there are all these programs that are managed by by CONAFOR, which is the Forest Commission in Mexico, which actually, like at the international level, has also been at the forefront of many of these conservation incentive programs that are linked to the RED strategy and to payment for environmental services. So some of these are also found in this conservation area in Mexico City. And if you're familiar with the pest literature, you may know of the work, for example, of Tracy Osborne, of Elizabeth Shapiro Garza, of Jennifer Alex Garcia, Steve Corvera, or Kathleen McAfee. So most of this work actually covers the implementation of these federal programs in different areas of Mexico where the highest concentration of forests are found. Another area that is very important also for Mexico City is the support that is provided by the local Secretary of Natural Resources, SEDEMA, through its Corporation of Natural Resource Management, Corena. So they also run programs that are similar to these conservation incentive programs that also incorporate payment for environmental services, such as in the case of watersheds, and also they have one experience of carbon credits. But this area of research of these local programs that the Mexico City government has been doing in the conservation zone have been less explored in the literature. However, it is very important because if we consider the amount of money that has been spent, we actually see that 88% of the financing that went through these conservation incentive programs between 1996 and 2018 came from these local resources. Since 2019, the main program that has been operating for conservation is known as Altepetl Bienestar, which was started by Claudia Sheinbaum when she became mayor of Mexico City. Of course, you may be familiar with Sheinbaum since she was just inaugurated as Mexico's first female president just yesterday. So prior to that, she was first a mayor of one of the alcaldías of the districts in Mexico City, and then also she became the jefa de gobierno, or the mayor of Mexico City. And so this program is part of the Cuarta Transformación, right? Which is the political
He
project.
also recommended that I use a new colirio. Well, I add to my colirio.
Excuse, hi. Okay, excellent. So this program is part of the Cuarta Transformación of the former President López Obrador, right? And it incorporated this integrated approach that included both conservation, agroecology, and commercialization. However, like, this program has been very controversial too as well. First, because of its linkages to different forms of clientelism, and also there are critiques of how agroecological are some of the farming practices that are being promoted, right? Especially for some of the incentives that require people to show proof of land possession that have provided incentives for degradation, especially of the grasslands. So I think this is another area where we need more work also to understand the effects of this program. So there has been many different programs throughout the last 3 decades with different names, but what they basically all have in common is trees in terms of reforestation, and also providing employment to the local community. So we can actually see that the earliest or the first reforestation campaign actually occurred at the beginning of the 20th century under Porfirio Diaz with Miguel Ángel de Quevedo, who already had a vision of understanding the protection of the forest was important for water provision in the city. Then if we jump forward, like we see that between 1947 and 1984, when the paper mill was operated, they were the ones who were mainly in charge of reforestation programs as part of their forest management that they have to do for their extraction operations. Then, like most recently, starting in the mid 1990s, that's when we start to see a more concerted effort from the Mexico City government to do conservation policy, and we start seeing these reforestation campaigns. However, they tended to hire people that were not from these boroughs of Mexico City. And part of this was because he was part of the Partido de la Revolución Institucional, PRI, which was the party that was in power in Mexico for over 70 years. So they were basically providing employment also to their clientele who was brought from other parts of the city to work in these reforestation campaigns. Also, they tended to use non-native species because they were considered to be of more rapid growth, which turned out in many cases into what's being known as tree cemeteries, right? Where where there are records in the community or there are collections in the community of some of these brigaders who were working in these reforestation campaigns of literally taking like these saplings and going up into the forest and throwing them into a mass burial, right? As a way of basically of showing that they were complying with the operations and spending the budget, but without even doing the reforestation itself. So, like, needless to say, that wasn't very effective, right, in terms of reforestation. Then in 1998, there is a significant change in the way that the city is governed. So for the first time, people in Mexico City are able to elect their authorities. The PRD, the Partido de la Revolución Democrática, their candidate gets elected as the first mayor of Mexico City to be democratic elected, and with this it brings a very different orientation to the way that they want to do government, right? So this then opens the space for the community members to participate in the brigades, and also for the planting of native species, which has been recorded that actually that it had a significant impact on the effectiveness of these reforestation programs, right? So, like in many ways, then like, we can say that there was a success, right, of this model of participatory reforestation, where the brigadistas, like they were not only engaged only in conservation, but also in fire prevention and management and environmental education. And it is estimated that about 3,000 hectares of forest in the borough of Milpa Alta, which is enclosed totally in the conservation zone, had been planted during this period. In particular, also, there is the experience of the nursery of Tepetluacan, where there was the production of these native species that then they were used for the reforestation of the forest. And also they run an environmental education program called Escuela-Ecológica that was very instrumental also in fostering a new generation of community conservationists in Milpa Alta. So this is happening in the 1990s, going towards the 2000s. However, in many ways, the success of the reforestation program was itself also a problem for conservation, as community members then later began to realize, and mostly because what was happening that they were planting in many cases a single species. At this beginning in particular, they were planting a non-native species to this region, which is Pinus patula. Pinus patula, it's native to Mexico, but it doesn't grow naturally in this region, and it was the first species that was favored during the reforestation campaigns, right? So this led to this phenomenon that is known in the Green Desert, not only occurs in Mexico, but it occurs all over the world that basically comes to represent these plantation forests that they look green and lush, but they actually have very low levels of biodiversity because of the way that their ecosystems have been altered by the contribution of either a non-native species or a fast-growing species that is able to take over, right? And that alters the structural complexity and the habitat variety that exists in these places. So some of the effects that we have been seeing of these massive reforestation campaigns in this part of Mexico City include the densification of forests. So this part of the suelo de uso de conservación is what's considered as open forest with different conifer varieties that exist along grasslands. As you can see in the picture on top, that shows more or less how the spacing of the trees should be. And if you see like the one on the bottom, that shows the result after the massive reforestations, right? Where they just basically, they were trying to put trees everywhere that they can. This led also to the replacements of grasslands. So in some cases, they were doing reforestation that led to densification, and in some other cases, they were actually planting trees on grasslands. Part of the reason for doing that is that, from the government perspective, grasslands were also considered as in the same category as agricultural lands. So that's why like they were considered to have less value in terms of their ecological services, something that is slowly changing. This also resulted in the displacement of local species. So for example, especially with the volcano rabbit, which habitates these open forests that have a very rich herbaceous layer. When the trees were densified, this prevented the growth of the herbaceous layer, which then led to their displacement, and as well as of many other species. And then also it has actually contributed to canopy fires, because basically now that the canopies are getting in contact with one another, that's easier for the continuity of aerial fuel from tree canopy to tree canopy. And the brigadistas, they are also in charge of fire management and fire control, but they had very limited equipment. They basically only have shovels, right? So they don't really have they can't do anything, like when they are dealing with these canopy fires. So the problem, though, is that the forest ban that I talked about, that was established in 1947, is still in force. So technically, there can be no logging, no extraction of any fuel material, unless it is strictly controlled by the authorities. So this has really provoked, also contributed, right, to this problem of densification and lack of management of these plantations. So this is where the Milpalta Biological Monitoring Group comes in. So they are the community group that we work with here in William and Mary. They were established in 2014 as a local group to participate in the monitoring of the volcano rabbit and the Sierra sparrow, being two of the most emblematic species for this region. But they also had a long history of involvement in different activities of environmental activism. So many of the members of this group, they participated in this nursery that I talked about with the Social-Ecological. So they have already been part of this process since the beginning. They were also involved in broader engagement with the authorities of Mexico City for the recognition of their territorial rights. So this is a very interesting region in Mexico that is part of the nucleus agrarios, right? Which is a category that comes out of the recognition after the Constitution of 1917 that during the Civil War in Mexico, the Revolución Mexicana, that for communities such as as those in Milpalta, it recognizes the ancestral territorial rights into comunidades agrarias, right? So they have been involved as part of this fighting for the territorial rights, and also they have been involved more recently in the brigades for reforestation. However, as they were participating in these brigades, right, that were part of these conservation incentive programs, from which they were getting a salary, right, as part of the payment for environmental service that they were provided, they were also realizing how the kind of problem that they were creating, right, by planting more and more trees. Because in some cases, right, like they were going 2 or 3 times to the same place to plant more and more and more, even when they were seeing that there was high mortality or that the trees were not developing, or even from their own ecological knowledge of the region, like they realized, right, that these were spaces that were supposed to be for open grasslands, right? So something connected in them very quickly that they realized that this was not right. And as I mentioned, so they originally started for the monitoring of the Sierra Sparrow and the volcano rabbit, but then very quickly they realized that if they wanted to protect the habitat of these two species, they also needed to address this broader issue of the Desierto Verde. So this group in particular comes from the community of San Pablo's Ostotepec, which is one of the 9 communities that forms the confederation of the community of Milpalta. So this is a community that is ancestral, which in Mexico is known as a pueblo originario, which basically means that it was recognized, right, even before the time of the Spanish. It was actually recognized by Hernán Cortés in 1529, just shortly after the conquest of Tenochtitlan. So that's just to give you like a background, right, of the ancestrality of this community. But it was not until 1952 that the Mexican government recognized the community as part of the social sector or the agrarian sector that the ejidos and communities form a part of. But even then, there's been many issues for the community of San Pablo Sotepec and for the other 8 towns that form part of the Confederation of Milpalta to enforce their territorial rights, because there is a border, there is a boundary dispute with another community of San Salvador Cuatenco, where basically, because there is a border dispute between communities, that means that these núcleos agrarios are considered a foco rojo, right, like a red hotspot. So that basically for the Mexican government, like that means that many of their programs can't operate there because they're considered to have an active conflict. So, for example, many of the programs under the federal government and CONAFOR, right, like RED and so on, they can't be applied in this particular region because of this conflict with the community of San Salvador Cuatenco. So this community group in Milpalta, like they work in different activities. As I mentioned, I mean, like they started with the monitoring of fauna. They have also expanded to work with other species too as well. As part of their effort of habitat restoration, they have focused on both on the protection and the restoration of grasslands, which are the main habitat for the Sierra sparrow, because the Sierra sparrow, like it only lays its eggs in this subalpine grassland that only exists in very particular areas of the conservation zone. This is an area that is also part of an agro-pastoral system, which has been subject to control burnings, right, as part of the activities of the herders to regenerate the grasses for both cattle and sheep rearing. So as part of the activities that the group is doing is also trying different methods of control burns to see if that could minimize the impact on the nest of the Sierra sparrow and give them a better chance of survival. They also do environmental education, and that actually has been one of the main activities that they had been doing in the past and being quite successful as well. And this, the picture that you can see at the bottom on the right, it comes from a play that they created and directed an act on it that is a Sacatuche rabbit, the volcano rabbit, and the Sierra sparrow that are basically telling the audience about the threats to their habitats. And they're also getting involved in forest restoration, which I will turn next. So as part of forest restoration, so as I mentioned, like this community group, it incorporates individuals from different generations. So you have those who had a very active engagement with the forest in the 1970s, 1980s, who knew who knew what the forest used to look like prior to this massive reforestation. So they were bringing that knowledge right into the group as well. And also they were incorporating the more scientific forestry practices of the younger generations who have actually also obtained a higher education degrees in forestry engineering and so on, right? So it has really been a combination of both the traditional and scientific forestry that has led them to the creation of this empirical form of forest restoration that they call silvicultura preventiva or preventive silviculture, which basically, and this would be familiar to most of you, right? Like it includes first and foremost doing a thinning of the canopy, right, to remove like any dead or unhealthy trees from the forest, and this of course like prevents fires risk and also improves the regeneration. It also includes aerial pruning, and then and collecting the different residues that are from the canopy, either by chopping them or by transporting them to a different area. In some cases, even utilizing some of this wood also for household consumption. And there is a comment in the chat book of the volcano rabbit. Yes, so the volcano rabbit is known both as the Poringo and the Sacatuche too as well. And then also for the management of the fuels, right, that come from this pruning that is done. So just bear in mind, right, from what I mentioned that the forestry ban like is still in place. So technically speaking, like these activities will be considered against the law. But as you can tell, I mean, like they are highly important, right, for the restoration of the forest. So here are some examples of what the forest used to look like and what they looked after doing the preventive silviculture. So so the team then in Milpalta, like they were very engaged in this, but they also had their own questions as to how effective like these practices were. And this is where we started with this collaboration with William and Mary, specifically with the Institute for Territorial Conservation, which is a new unit that was established here at the college in 2021 that runs the conservation research program that involves faculty, students, and partners in conservation to try to address some of their conservation challenges. So as part of this program, we first started our first project in 2022, helping the group create a guide for plant identification because they were not necessarily experts in in the flora, right? Like most of their activities like had been on the fauna side, so the flora side was relatively new for them. And then like we also help organize a community video workshop to help promote their activities. Then in 2023, we returned to Mexico to do a pilot of an evaluation technique to try to see if we can figure out whether the restoration practices have been successful. And then like more recently, in June of 2024, we returned to Mexico to try to look at the ecological dynamics of the plantation forest compared to the natural forest. So this is all ongoing research as part of us trying to understand with the community what might be the best way to do forest restoration. So what I'm going to turn next as the last part of the presentation is to show you some of the results from the pilot evaluation that we did in the summer of 2023. So here, like this, the main goal then was to use citizen science tools to be able to develop a sampling method that will be accessible to non-scientists. So this included, for example, like using certain measurements that would be easy to use, like on the ground, and also that the equipment will be accessible as well. And our strategy was based in comparing 3 different types of forest sites. So those that will be considered natural forests, right, where there has not been like intervention from this massive reforestation. Those that were subjected to these massive reforestations, that we call them the disturbed forests, and then like those forests that have gone through this treatment of silviculture. And from there, like we collected data using a line point intercept sample to collect data on soil coverage, on herbaceous shrub, on the tree canopy layers. Also, with a tree survey to obtain measurements on basal area, dominance, density, and we analyze like this information with non-parametric methods. So this is like an example, right? So some of the pictures when we were doing the line transects that included first delineating this 10 by 50 meter plots that then were subdivided into 5 subplots that we took measurements in 3 of them. And as I mentioned, I mean, this was all done with affordable materials, including ropes, stakes, and transect tape. So as part of our piloting, like we work in two areas of the conservation zone. So first, in Las Manitas, that have been subjected to reforestation from these non-native species of Pinus patula, and you can see in these Google Earth images the comparison from 2003 to 2023 is stark, right, in terms of the densification of the forest canopy, and you can see like the rows of the plantation pretty well, right? So we did 13 plots in Las Manitas, and then we also work in Soquiac, which is a region that was where the reforestation was done with a native species of Pinus montezumei, and we can also see that there was less of the plantation rows as in the previous one, but still is pretty noticeable. So in terms of being a pilot, one of the most encouraging results was the validation of the technique in terms of being able to consider that there's a relation between light penetration. So that light that is able to infiltrate the canopy, and the regeneration of the vegetation cover, especially for the herbaceous layer, right? So the hypothesis here was that the thinning practices was going to increase like this light penetration that was going to allow for more for shrubs and for the herbaceous layer to flourish. So if we just take all of the plots that we did, we can see that there's a correlation between the light penetration and the herbaceous layer, so that indicates or suggests that the method itself was that it was working. Now, in terms of the comparison that we were interested, so in the next 3 slides, I'm going to show you some of the key indicators, which basically, I mean, like they can be all summarized into that we were not able to see any significant differences between the disturbed forests and those that have gone through the treatment of silviculture. But we could see that there were significant differences with those that were natural forests, right? Yeah, as we can see here in terms of vegetation. So there is no statistically significance between the disturbed and the silviculture, but we see that there's a difference with those that were natural. If we look at tree cover, right, so we see the same, that there is no statistically significant difference between the trimming and the control, but we can see that there's a difference with those that were considered natural forests. And if we look at tree diameter, we actually found that there was no statistically significance among any of them, right? So we're still in the process of trying to interpret the results, and also bearing in mind that this was a pilot and that the sampling of the plots it's on the lower end, right? So but the pilot was very important in terms of us realizing, right? I mean, what are some of the assumptions that were being made in our evaluation, and that we need to look at those more carefully. First, we see that there is this what we consider to be an overlap in the tree densities between like those treatment between the disturbed forest and the silviculture forest, which could be explained perhaps, and this is a hypothesis that we have, that we're in the process of trying to figure out how to look more like deep into it, was that the Milpa Alta group, they were selecting to work in those plots that had the densest forest cover, right? So like in many ways, it could have been that the silviculture was successful, but that only brought the density of the stands to the same level as we will find in the disturbed forest that did not have the treatment, right? Because like in many ways, like they were starting from a different condition, and that's something that the members of the group like they confirmed, right? I mean that they were basically trying to prioritize like those areas where that have the higher concentration. And there are of course like these other dynamics of forests, right? In terms of the mortality rates and the canopy growth that we are that we're estimating that as soon as as some clearings that were done in terms of the canopy, that the forest was growing also to take space, right? So that's why like there are reasons to believe that what we need to incorporate in any future assessment is also trying to account for like more precisely for the time that it took between the different prunings and when the measures were taken, right? To take into consideration also those temporal dynamics. Now, as a mode of conclusion, as we're running out of time, in terms of what does it mean to resist the green desert, right? So first and foremost, I mean like this conservation effort of forest restoration is really part of defending common property in rural Mexico City, right? So this is a way in which the Grupo de Monitoreo is fighting off these clientelistic relations that have been built through this payment for ecosystem services, that we're basically paying members of the community to do tree planting, but with little consideration for whether that was actually good for the forest. But for many communities, it has also become another livelihood source, right? So I think that with this group in particular, because of their agenda towards a territoriality, right? On building an indigenous center land governance, that was another mechanism through which they were able to fight off these clientelistic pressures. Also, I mean, like it's very interesting to see how emblematic species such as the Sierra sparrow in this case have been really important in mobilizing the local community. So in conservation, there is a lot of debate about the the strategic value of charismatic fauna, but in this case, what we found with the Sierra sparrow is that it has been charismatic fauna that has been quite effective at mobilizing local action. So there is something important to be said about that. Then, as I was mentioning, one of the reasons why the group in Milpalta has been so successful has been because of how they have merged both their traditional ecological knowledge of the landscape with this with scientific forestry as well. Here there is a conversation to be had in terms of policy of whether the forest ban can be defensible. There is a whole also like point of consideration for illegal for illegal logging that we can talk about in the Q&A, but as a way of principle, right? I mean, it's like, why are not communities able to also make sustainable use of the forest resources that could actually contribute to some of these preventive silviculture to reduce the risk of fire and restore ecological restoration and restore the ecosystems, right? Here, of course, we get into what we're still trying to figure out as part of the community science part in terms of how to establish a baseline and what the restoration goals should be, right? I mean, is it possible to go back to the way that things were, or how to think about like what those goals like might be for restoration? And then finally, in terms of how we think about the effectiveness of community science, first and foremost, I mean, like the importance of contextualizing environmental data. I think that to really be able to understand forest restoration in this part of Mexico City of its conservation zone, you have to look at this from the perspective of agrarian struggles and territorial rights, right? I mean, like that's really what motivates people to participate in the protection of their commons and the kinds of incentives that you should be providing. And there's still an open question as to how we can create more alliances, work with more of the forest brigades, because so far we have only been working with like one of them, but there are dozens of other brigades that are working in this region, and we're trying to figure out how to bring them into this ecological restoration program, and also how we can talk with the authorities to, as we build evidence, to show them that we can think of doing forest restoration in a different way. And that's it. And here is my contact information. I'll be more than happy to discuss it any further. And let me then maybe stop the share, so in case there are any questions. Or should I leave the slides on? What do you guys prefer?
Let's just see you, if that's okay. Is
Okay,
that all right?
perfect. Yeah. So let me stop sharing.
Yeah.
There we go. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Fernando,
I think I
thank
see
you
a
so much
hand
for
up. Yeah.
experiences. I think that we have short time for some questions or comments, and also if the people in the meeting want to share something through the chat or through the microphone, yeah.
You said you saw a hand up, Fernando. I can't see. Is there?
Excuse me?
You saw a hand up online. Is
Oh,
that
yeah, I
right?
think Eduardo had his,
Okay,
his
Eduardo,
hand up, right?
adelante.
I was just clapping with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It was very muy interesante. I don't know. No, well, Carlos does not speak Spanish, right?
Él se habla portugués, pero creo que se puede
Sí.
entender.
Sí, puede hablar en español. Yo hablo portuñol.
¿Todos hablan español? Sí, ¿no?
Portuñol.
Claro. Bastante.
Bueno, pues bueno, espero que entiendas, Carlos. Solo quería compartir que es muy interesante porque yo crecí ahí donde está la planta de papel, la fábrica de papel. Todavía
Ajá.
cuando era niño olía, o sea, cuando estaban quemando o lo que hacían para hacer el papel, los procesos, olía bastante mal por ahí. Y ya cuando en los mediados de los 80 pues pararon. Y bueno, esa parte de la ciudad, es increíble la foto que mostraste, porque esa parte de la ciudad ahora es una ciudad gigante. O sea, eso lo compró, ese terreno de la planta de papel la compró Carlos Slim, y
Ajá.
ahora están ahí los edificios de Telmex y
Sí.
corporaciones más grandes. Es un cambio impresionante. Solo que decir eso. Y yo siempre admiré mucho esos bosques que se veían desde mi casa, porque pues, estudiando biología en la UNAM, que está ahí al lado,
Claro.
nota de que ahí notablemente viene nuestra agua, ¿no? Entonces, sí se ha visto la degradación constantemente. Incluso yo dejé la Ciudad de México en 2004 y ahora que regresé en 2024 y tomé esa carretera rumbo hacia Morelos y pasas por todo lo que es el Ajusco, es impresionante cómo se sigue degradando, ¿no? A pesar de todas los bans y todo lo que hay, ¿no? Pero, pues felicidades, eso lo quería
Absolutamente, sí.
decir. Felicidades, es el conejo teporingo. Nosotros de niño íbamos justo a acampar a un valle que se llamaba el Teporingo, por eso es el conejo. Y bueno, nada, me inspiró mucho, ¿no? Me dieron ganas de regresar a vivir a Ciudad de México y trabajar contigo en esos bosques.
No, claro, por supuesto.
Pero
Siempre estás
es
buscando más
importantísimo.
colaboradores. Sí.
Es importantísimo ese trabajo, de verdad. Hay un investigador, Víctor Ávila Ackenberg.
Claro, por supuesto, es un colega.
Bien, pues él es muy interesado en el bosque de agua. Pues hay mucho trabajo por hacer y felicidades por incluir a la comunidad en los trabajos, ¿no? En las
Claro, por
investigaciones.
supuesto. Me faltó decir que la razón por la cual William y Mary entramos en contacto con este grupo comunitario en San Pablo, Statepec, fue gracias a la intervención de Jürgen Hort, que ha interactuado con diferentes grupos de conservación, que fue el que formuló la estrategia para la protección del bosque de agua cuando trabajó en Conservation International, y él fue el que nos puso en contacto con Víctor Ávila, con la doctora Lucía Almeida en la UNAM, porque definitivamente hay muchísima investigación que se ha hecho en el suelo de uso de conservación, y lo que estamos haciendo ahorita es intentar ligarlo más con estos programas, por ejemplo, como con el programa Bienestar, ¿no? Que esta es la parte más eh, de ecología política que estamos trayendo ahora para poder entender tanto la parte de la conservación, de los servicios ambientales, pero también la parte política, clientelista y de conflictos agrarios que es tan importante, ¿no? Nada más un comentario rápido sobre la papelera. Parte de lo que surge también de la inquietud en poder saber cuál es nuestra línea de base para pensar sobre la restauración es ver inclusive cómo era el bosque antes de que la papelera empezara a hacer sus reforestaciones también, porque inclusive hay una hipótesis ahí que, que el bosque era todavía menos denso, pero que después por las propias plantaciones que la papelera hizo entre los años 40 a los 70, que eso intensificó más el bosque. Entonces, la línea base que tenemos ahorita, pues lo hace cognitiva por parte de los miembros del equipo, viene de los 80, ¿no? Pero se supone que ese bosque ya estaría alterado también. Entonces, estamos queriendo intentar si podemos encontrar fotografías aéreas que se hicieron por parte del servicio militar en los años 30, 40 para poder ver si esto nos daba un poco más de luces para ver cómo era el bosque en aquel entonces.
Oh, qué bien, qué bien. Pues mañana voy a platicar con Víctor Ávila.
Ah,
Este,
ok, cuéntale. Claro,
por
de que
Zoom, le voy a
estuviste.
contar. Pues muy
Ajá,
bien, muy,
excelente.
felicidades. En realidad no tengo una pregunta, es total sentido ese trabajo. Y ahora con Sembrando Vida, ¿no? Ese programa del
Ujú,
gobierno federal, pues me
sí,
será muy interesante ver qué efectos tiene también, pero también cómo ha ido evolucionando, ¿no? Cómo ya usan otras
ujú,
especies, cómo
claro.
ha
Ujú,
ido evolucionando para mejor, ¿no? Entonces,
ujú, ujú,
bueno,
así
gracias,
es.
Fernando.
Ujú. Claro, Eduardo, un gusto. Ujú.
Hola, ¿me escucha? Fernando.
Sí, hola, ¿qué tal?
Bueno, sí, yo tengo una pregunta, bueno, dos. Creo que no sé si me podrías aclarar, no me quedó muy claro si este grupo de monitoreo biológico de Milpalta fue y está siendo todavía parte de los programas de servicios de pago por servicios ecosistémicos, es decir, sus proyectos, sus actividades están siendo financiadas por estos programas.
Ujú,
Uno, y dos, eh, me preguntaba si las comunidades locales, los ejidos, y si es que hablan en términos de conservación, la
ujú,
importancia del territorio para ellos, o en qué
ujú,
otros términos lo expresan.
ujú, ujú. Claro, no, excelentes preguntas. El grupo primeramente se estableció porque parte de los incentivos que había para los programas de servicio, para los pagos por servicios ambientales, incluía también el monitoreo de flora y fauna. Entonces, el grupo fue seleccionado entre personas que ya estaban trabajando con las brigadas forestales para que comenzaran este nuevo grupo, más con una índole de investigación en vez de trabajar en lo que comúnmente se hace, que es en reforestación y prevención y manejo de incendios, para trabajar en la recolección de datos para el conejo zacatuche teporingo y para el gorrión serrano, ¿no? Entonces, sí, sí comenzó el grupo como parte de este andamiaje, ¿no? De la Corena, y todavía continúa siendo parte de estos programas que siguen evolucionando, ¿no? En los 2000 se llamaban de una manera, ahora son parte de bienestar. Lo interesante aquí y donde es muy importante recalcar por qué la lucha territorial es tan importante para entender las labores de este grupo, es de que ellos decidieron que como parte de su labor de monitoreo comunitario también tenían que trabajar en la restauración de los hábitats de estas especies. Entonces, su llegada a la restauración tanto de los pastizales como de los bosques es en función a el trabajo que ellos hacían para el monitoreo de la fauna. Pero cuando comenzaron con las actividades, por ejemplo, que mostré para la silvicultura preventiva y para la repastización, estas no eran actividades que eran consideradas oficiales como parte de los programas de la Corena. Y tanto es así que la parte que tiene que ver con la silvicultura, en teoría, era prohibida también por la veda forestal, ¿no? Hacer ese tipo de poda aérea, de cortar madera, acumularla, inclusive llevarla a la comunidad para que se aprovechara. En términos estrictos, está prohibido por la veda forestal. Entonces, ellos han tenido que trabajar en una incertidumbre legal, también en contacto y comunicación, por supuesto, con las autoridades, tanto las autoridades de la Ciudad de México como las autoridades de San Pablo Statepec, que apoyan el trabajo de, eh, del grupo, pero fue por iniciativa propia, ¿no? Entonces aquí es donde es tan importante ver de que se puede trabajar dentro de estos programas de conservación y no ser absorbido por la parte más clientelística o programática de los programas, porque también se puede ver el ejercicio de esta resistencia, ¿no? Para defender la autonomía. Y eso también surge como parte de la segunda pregunta que mencionabas también, si ellos hablan en, en términos de conservación. Actualmente sí se utiliza este término de conservación también para hablar sobre en estos terrenos de la comunidad agraria, pero por supuesto que está visto como una conservación que también tiene que tomar en cuenta los otros usos que dan los comuneros también, ¿no? Por eso es que se habla de que la veda forestal es considerada injusta porque se podría pensar en un programa de manejo forestal sostenible donde se pueda dar el cuidado de la restauración de los bosques que se requiere, así como aprovechar el recurso también que es importante.
Bueno, Fernando, bueno, una disculpa que nos excedimos un poquitito en el tiempo. ¿Más alto?
Sí, un poco más alto. Dos.
Bueno, Fernando, muchas gracias. Creo que ya estamos un poco limitados de tiempo, pero de verdad fue una conversación muy valiosa. Muchas gracias por tu tiempo, muchas gracias a todos quienes asistieron. Fue una charla muy inspiradora.
Excelente, un placer y como pueden ver, es trabajo que todavía está en progreso, entonces cualquier idea, cualquier inquietud es más que, o colaboración es más que bienvenida también.
Claro que sí.
Sí, muchas gracias, Fernando. Súper interesante. Yo me quedo con varias preguntas sobre, habiéndote conocido más con tu trabajo sobre autonomía, precisamente sobre esos temas, ¿no? De ecología política y las tensiones entre los márgenes de la legalidad, pero podemos seguir el debate en otro espacio ya, en respeto al tiempo de todos. Pero muchísimas
Claro
gracias.
que
Es un
sí.
gusto escuchar en qué aventuras andas.
Mil
Excelente.
gracias, Fernando. Un abrazo muy fuerte.
Gracias, un abrazo a todos. Bye.
Gracias.